Right now, as you are watching this video, the United States national debt is increasing by approximately $100,000 every single second. Not per minute, not per hour, every single second. By the time this video ends, the US government will have added another $78 million to a debt that has already crossed $36 trillion. 36 trillion. That number is so large, most people's brains simply refuse to process it. So let's make it real. If you tried to pay off $36 trillion at $1 per second, it would take you over 1.1 million years. And here's the part that should terrify you. It is accelerating, not slowing down, not stabilizing, getting faster every single year. In this video, we are going to show you exactly what $36 trillion in debt actually means, who is responsible, what happens when it gets called in, and most importantly, what it means for your money, your job, and your future. Welcome to Broke by Design. Before we talk about why $36 trillion is terrifying, we need to understand what the national debt actually is, because most people have a completely wrong idea. The national debt is not like your personal debt. It is not a credit card bill that needs to be paid off by a certain date. It is the total accumulated amount the US government has borrowed over its entire history to cover the gap between what it spends and what it collects in taxes. Every year, the government spends more than it takes in. That annual shortfall is called the deficit. And every year, that deficit gets added to the total national debt. In 2023 alone, the US ran a deficit of $1.7 trillion. In 2024, it was $1.8 trillion. The government is not just failing to pay down the debt, it is adding to it at a record pace every single year. Here's how we got to $36 trillion. In 1980, the national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, it had grown to $5.6 trillion. By 2008, it hit $10 trillion. By 2020, it crossed $27 trillion. And today, in 2026, it sits at $36 trillion and climbing. That trajectory is not gradual, it is exponential. The debt doubled in the last 15 years. And based on current spending projections, the Congressional Budget Office estimates it will hit $50 trillion by 2033. But here's the number that matters more than the total debt figure: the interest. The US government now pays over $1 trillion per year just in interest on its existing debt. Not paying down the principal, not funding roads or schools or the military, just the interest. $1 trillion per year going straight to the people who hold US government bonds. And that number is growing every single year as rates stay elevated. For context, the entire US defense budget is about $850 billion per year. The government now spends more on debt interest than on national defense. Let that land for a moment. So who does the US government owe $36 trillion to? This is the question almost nobody asks, and the answer changes everything about how you see this crisis. About 77% of US debt is held domestically. The Federal Reserve holds roughly $4.5 trillion. US pension funds, mutual funds, banks, and insurance companies hold the majority of the rest. The remaining 23%, about $8 trillion, is held by foreign governments and investors. Japan and China are the two largest foreign holders, with approximately $1.1 trillion and $770 billion respectively. Now here's the part that directly affects you. When the US government needs to borrow money, it sells treasury bonds. And to attract buyers for those bonds, especially as the debt grows larger and the risk perception increases, it has to offer competitive interest rates. Higher debt means higher rates needed to attract buyers. Higher rates means more interest to pay. More interest means more borrowing. More borrowing means more debt. It is a cycle that feeds itself. And who ultimately pays for all of this? You do. There are only three ways a government can deal with debt this large. It can raise taxes, it can cut spending, or it can inflate its way out, printing money and allowing inflation to erode the real value of the debt over time. Option 1, raising taxes, means less money in your pocket directly. Option 2, cutting spending, means reduced services, reduced benefits, reduced infrastructure, things that affect your daily life. Option 3, inflation, which we covered in our first video, is the sneakiest of the three. It doesn't show up as a tax on your pay stub. It shows up as higher prices at the grocery store, higher rent, a higher cost of existing. It is a tax you pay every single day without realizing it is connected to government debt policy. In practice, governments almost always choose option 3, because inflation is the only tax that doesn't require a vote. Every generation has heard warnings about the national debt. So why is this time different? Why should you be more concerned now than at any point in the past 50 years? 3 reasons, and each one on its own would be concerning. Together, they represent something genuinely unprecedented. Reason 1. Interest rates changed everything. For most of the last 15 years, the US government was able to borrow at near zero interest rates. Debt was cheap. A $30 trillion debt at 0.5% interest is manageable. The same debt at 4.5% interest is a completely different situation. The Federal Reserve's rate hiking cycle between 2022 and 2024 fundamentally changed the cost of carrying this debt. The average interest rate on US debt has risen from under 2% to over 3.2%, and as older low-rate bonds mature and get replaced with new higher-rate bonds, that average will keep rising for years. The Congressional Budget Office projects that interest payments will consume 35 cents of every federal tax dollar by 2034, up from roughly 13 cents today. That is money that cannot go to healthcare, cannot go to infrastructure, cannot go to any of the things that affect your daily life. Reason 2. We are adding debt during a strong economy. Here's the truly alarming part that most economists won't say loudly. Historically, governments run large deficits during recessions and emergencies, wars, financial crises, pandemics. They borrow to stimulate the economy when it's struggling and then pay it back during the good times. The US is not doing that anymore. In 2023 and 2024, with unemployment near historic lows and the economy growing, the government ran deficits of $1.7 and $1.8 trillion respectively. These are emergency-level deficits during non-emergency economic conditions, which means when the next recession hits, and recessions always come, the government will have almost no fiscal room to respond. The bazooka that was used in 2008 and 2020 to stabilize the economy may not be available next time, because it's already been fired. Reason 3. Nobody in power has any real incentive to fix it. This is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Cutting the deficit requires either raising taxes or cutting spending. Raising taxes loses votes. Cutting spending, especially Social Security, Medicare, and defense, which together account for roughly 70% of federal spending, loses votes. So politicians of both parties have spent 50 years choosing the path of least resistance. Borrow more, deal with it later. Leave it for the next administration. The result is $36 trillion in debt, and a political system that is structurally incapable of solving it because solving it is electoral suicide. So, given everything we just laid out, a $36 trillion debt growing at $100,000 per second with no political will to stop it and 3 painful options for resolution, what do you actually do? First, understand that inflation is now a permanent feature of your financial life, not a temporary problem. As long as the debt grows and option 3 remains the most politically palatable solution, inflation will be used, deliberately or by consequence, to erode the real value of that debt. That means your cash savings lose value over time, by design. We covered this in our inflation video, but now you understand the deeper structural reason why it keeps happening. The practical implication: keeping large amounts of cash idle is a guaranteed slow loss. High-yield savings accounts, treasury bonds, which ironically are one of the few assets that actually benefit from this dynamic, and inflation hedging assets like broad index funds and real estate at the right price all become more important the longer this debt trajectory continues. Second, understand that taxes are almost certainly going higher over the next decade. The math doesn't work any other way. At some point, the interest burden becomes politically unsustainable and revenue has to increase. That could mean higher income taxes, higher capital gains taxes, a new wealth tax, or value-added taxes on consumption. Nobody knows exactly what form it will take, but the direction is clear. The practical implication: tax-advantaged accounts become even more valuable than they already are. Maxing out your 401k, your IRA, your HSA, every dollar sheltered from future higher tax rates is a dollar protected. If you aren't maximizing these accounts right now, you are leaving money on the table that will be harder to recover later. Third, understand that the social safety net you are counting on may not look the same when you need it. Social Security is already projected to face a funding shortfall by 2033. Medicare faces similar long-term pressures. As the interest burden on the national debt crowds out discretionary spending, the programs that millions of Americans depend on face increasing pressure. That doesn't mean they disappear, but it does mean relying on them entirely as your retirement plan is a significant risk. The practical implication: your personal financial independence is more important now than at any point in recent history, not because the system will definitely fail, but because the margin for error is shrinking, and the consequences of that shrinkage fall on ordinary people first. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at what we've covered across the last 4 videos. Inflation is quietly eroding the value of your money every month. The housing market has priced out an entire generation from the most fundamental asset of middle-class stability. The middle class itself is collapsing under the weight of stagnant wages, exploding essential costs, and a debt-fueled illusion of prosperity. And underneath all of it, the engine running silently in the background, is $36 trillion in national debt, growing by $100,000 every second with no meaningful plan to stop it. These are not separate problems. They are the same problem viewed from different angles. A financial system that has been spending beyond its means for 50 years and handing the bill to the people who had no say in creating it. That is what broke by design actually means at the macro level. Not just that individuals are struggling, but that the architecture of the entire system is built on a foundation of debt that someone someday has to pay for. And if history is any guide, that someone is never the people who built the debt. It's you. Subscribe if this changed how you see the economy. Share it with someone who thinks the national debt is someone else's problem. It isn't. It never was. We'll see you next week.